So, Lone Rider here, and as you might be able to gather, I'm a pretty big X-Files fan, at least of the original stuff, not the new stuff. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here. Why is it that the original X-Files episodes hold up after all this time and the new stuff just kind of sucks? And there's a couple things at play here, more than a couple actually, but I just wanted to talk about a few of them. The first is that the X-Files has been out for a while, since the early 90s. That's over 20 years ago. What this means is that we've already been exposed to a lot of these ideas, and they've actually worked their way into other shows. The concept of a dark world where you don't know who to trust, and there's maybe some shenanigans going on, and of government corruption, which of course the X-Files didn't originate. Chris Carter himself explicitly stated several times that when he created the show and its atmosphere, he was aiming largely to duplicate the sense of distrust in the government that he experienced growing up in the Watergate era. And of course, it's worth noting that, the original informant in season 1 that helped out Mulder, or did he, was nicknamed Deep Throat, just like the Watergate informant. In fact, it's interesting that several of the meetings with the informant take place in parking garages, and also with the subsequent informant, Mr. X, played by Stephen Williams of 21 Jump Street fame. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that in the actual Watergate scandal, apparently the informant met with them in a parking garage. Something as simple as several of the meetings actually do take place at the Watergate Hotel. In fact, the very first episode of season 2, Scully meets with Mulder in the Watergate Hotel in the parking garage. So, they leaned on this very heavily, and I think he drew very heavily on the general sort of distrust that people had in the government when they were doing this. And, of course, all of this was touched on in the film All the President's Men, way before the X-Files was ever even conceived, was ever a twinkle in Mr. Carter's eye. Here's the thing, though. He didn't originate it, but he popularized it. How many suspense movies or science fiction movies or movies where there's an element of something sinister going on involve one of the characters saying either I don't know who to trust, or don't trust anybody, or trust no one, right? It's become something that's used in every suspense or mystery or whatever, just as a catch-all to convey to the audience that that's the atmosphere we're setting up. And what atmosphere is that? The atmosphere that was perfected in the early X-Files episodes. That phrase, trust no one, which of course was popularized by the X-Files, has now actually become a sort of shorthand for the very atmosphere of the show itself that it sums up. And so yes, Chris Carter didn't create a lot of this, the X-Files didn't create a lot of this, but it combined a lot of stuff and it popularized it. Here's the problem. There's been a cultural diaspora. This has now gone into the rest of the culture, and you could watch a suspense movie today or next week, and somebody will probably say, "Don't trust anybody," or "Don't trust no one." And it's the problem is that when something that for its time was fairly original in how it was combined and presented, even if it didn't originate the ideas or concepts. Something that was fairly original in popularizing this has now been around for over 2 decades, which means that it's leaked its way into other parts of popular culture, which means that even the original and best, when you go back and you try to rejuvenate it, reboot it, whatever you want to call it, do a modern day X-Files episode, a lot of that now seems derivative. Not because they're ripping off stuff that came after the original X-Files they're trying to continue, but because it's just now so cliche almost. It's been done, not only by the X-Files, but by everybody since. And that, I think, is to the X-Files' credit and the credit of the original episodes, that the way they presented things and the catchphrases and the atmosphere became one that people wanted to capitalize on and people wanted to utilize for their own projects. I think that's wonderful. It shows that these things had value for that type of storytelling beyond just the X-Files themselves. Chris Carter was onto something there. But again, if you go back to the original after everything else since then has done the same thing, it seems kind of derivative. We saw this with the John Carter of Mars film. That's based on a story that was written like 100 years ago. And here's the problem. In the interim, we've had a bazillion outer space adventure epic, fish out of water hero transported to the middle of a foreign conflict stories with weird or cute or alarming looking aliens with weird out of space cultures and, that sort of thing. And, when they finally did produce a John Carter movie, it bombed. I actually saw it, and I'm probably one of the few people who watched it in its entirety. And I actually did enjoy some of it, I'm going to be honest. But I enjoyed it the way you'd enjoy a B movie, knowing that it was lame. Not because the story was lame. The story for its time was incredibly original. But its time was over 100 years ago. In the interim, we've seen this before. And so by the time they got around to making a movie of it, it seems derivative. I mean, there's a reason it didn't do well. Same thing with to some degree with the new X-Files stuff. There's a reason the second movie, the 2016 reboot, and whatever this new thing was that I never saw and have no intention of seeing, didn't do well in terms of a lot of people just found like they're rehashing the same old ground. So there's that. You can, even if you were the original and best, you can still seem derivative if it's been done before for 20 or 100 years in the interim. The second thing is that they forgot the lessons of the original series. The original series built suspense. You look at, some of the episodes, you wouldn't even know how the monster or the killer or whatever the villain was doing what he was doing until towards the end when they sort of figured it out. And then there would usually be some big reveal at the end where you actually saw it happen. Some of them you did see the actual murder or the aftermath, and it was kind of clear. Some of them you even knew who the killer was. But it still wasn't explained how or why he did it, and so on and so forth. A classic example of the great lengths they went to do the suspense was in the episode with Eugene Victor Toombs, third episode of the first season. You don't even see the actual murder at first. It takes place in a room, and you just see the door get splintered from behind. When they come in and they pan around and they look at the room, you see the dead body, but only in reflection on the stuff that's on the table. And then you see somebody pulling a vent closed, but you never see who it is because they're already inside. You just see it being pulled closed from the outside. So you don't know who or what did this, or how or why. And even when they finally catch the guy, then there's a question of could it be him? He supposedly passes a lie detector test, and supposedly whoever this was that was doing these murders is like almost 100 years old, but this guy looks like he's in his 20s. You don't really know until the end exactly what's going on, even though it's hinted at and you're sort of working up to the explanation. And even by the time you get to the second murder, you actually see him do the murder, but you don't see the actual killing. You see that the guy's lurking in the house. The victim is lighting a fire in a fireplace. He's pulled out of frame, and you just see his legs kind of sticking into frame, flat, thrashing around as there's a scream or a hollering. And then the fire that he was trying to light in the fireplace dies out. So they left so much to your imagination. And I don't know how much of this was they're trying to not be too gruesome for the TV ratings people, because this was 20 years ago. What it was acceptable to show on TV is very different than now. And the X-Files was fighting an uphill battle to stay on TV anyway, ever since its inception, until at a certain point, then it became popular, and then it was like, yay, we want more X-Files. But in the beginning, it was literally just put on there as filler, and they expected it to fail, which is why they aired it when they did. But they doled out suspense, they hashed it out, they really put a lot of work and effort and class into filming these scenes. And the overall story arc with the alien conspiracy, too, same thing. You didn't even actually see an alien until very far into the series. Contrast that with the very first episode of the 2016 miniseries. There's an alien walking around in plain view, and what's more, it looks so fake, it's clearly a guy in a rubber suit. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh no. It was so bad, I assumed they were setting that up to be some kind of fake out, and it would turn out that wasn't actually the alien. But nope, it was. And basically, they forgot all the lessons of what made the original series great. The suspense, the trying to leave a lot to your imagination, which, to be fair, is a lot scarier. which also avoids you trying to show things that you might not be able to show, or be able to show believably with the special effects technology available, or that might look hokey if you try to show too much. It worked so well in the original series. That element of uncertainty, that, again, harkening back to trust no one, that leaving a lot out worked. Another place they left a lot out was politics. There were episodes that dealt with, whether it was things like current events, such as there was an episode which Darkness Falls in the first season, which dealt with logging and environmental terrorism, eco-terrorism, or episodes that just dealt in general with issues like government corruption or military cover-ups. There certainly were episodes that touched on political issues or issues that were pregnant with political aspects. But they never made it overtly political and overtly left, right, whatever. In fact, if I had to say what the political leanings of the characters were, I honestly couldn't tell you. Especially the two main characters, Mulder and Scully. I could not tell you what Dana Scully's politics were. If you asked me to look at the original series, the first 9 seasons, I couldn't tell you what her politics were. Wow. It's pretty rare thing to say about a character in a show these days. But yeah, and it allowed the show to appeal to a variety of audiences. Whether you were in there just for the action and the sci-fi, whether you were in there for the drama, whether you were in there for the suspense or the horror or the scares or the chills, whether you were in there just because it was an entertaining thing to watch, whether you were in there because you were interested in the relationship between the characters and hoped thered be an eventual romantic subplot, which was a big thing in the beginning, whether you were, you're just a sci-fi fan. Well, for whatever reason you're watching the show, it allowed the show not to alienate you by beating you over the head with politics, because, after all, not everybody's going to agree on political issues. And when they did address specific ideological, things and concepts, it was in broad general terms that I would like to think most people on either side of the political spectrum could agree on. Things like no one's above the law and the government should be accountable. So, to me, again, it's a case where less was more. What they left out was almost as important as what they put in. Whether you're talking about suspense, whether you're talking about politics, etc. And that was a lesson they did not learn from the original series. And we saw this with the villain of the 2016 reboot was, the spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, some crooked government people that were using alien technology, but there really were never any aliens. So I guess 9 seasons of stuff that we saw never happened or was fake. And they used the idea in the original series, actually in the second episode of the very first season, after the pilot, they used the idea of the fact that the military might be flying UFOs or planes built with UFO technology, but they never used that to dismiss the idea of the existence of aliens and just say, well, it's a bunch of crooked people and there's your villain. It's a fat cat or the military-industrial complex or whatever. No, that's a standard villain. It's almost like not even interesting anymore. The X-Files was interesting because while there were crooked people and corruption and bad people and things like that, there was also this overarching sense of wonder and of magnitude that you were dealing with big questions that bordered on the universal or potentially even the spiritual. What's the nature of the universe? Is there life out there? That sort of thing. So, yes, in the second episode of the entire series, the very first season, Mulder says, if the military was flying planes built with UFO technology and covering up the bad things that happened to the pilots because they couldn't handle the technology, if that were true, and then Scully says, if that were true, it would be a national scandal, that kind of a cover-up. And Mulder says, no, you're not thinking big enough. If it was true, it would be confirmation of the existence of extraterrestrial life. The original series never lost sight of that big picture that made everything just have that much more punch and that much more oomph, and the stakes were so much greater. And the new series gave us greedy oil companies covering up supposedly alien technology because they wanted us to be dependent on fossil fuels, and a handful of corrupt, ex-military people. Seriously, that was what the 2016 series substituted for big, grandiose issues like, is there life on other planets and stuff like that. and the nature of the universe. And that, obviously there was a cover-up aspect to that in the original series in terms of the government's covering that up. But there was always that element of the surreal or the supernatural or the otherworldly that made it beyond just a cop show, that made it beyond just a drama about two people trying to fight corruption. That could be interesting and that can be a heroic tale in and of itself. But the X-Files was always something more. It was, in a literal sense, it was beyond that. And they didn't take that lesson either. And then you had, of course, who can forget the cameo of that clip of President Bush in the beginning? It's like, whatever you think of Bush, whether you think he was an a-hole or whether you think he was, a good president or whether you think he was a middling president, don't care either way. The point is, it's like, okay, I could see if they put in, Bush Sr., the president that just passed away, because he actually was CIA director at one point. So if you wanted to spin a conspiracy yarn involving one of the Bushes, I could see putting a clip of him in there. But I still think it would be, not fair. But, the guy's long gone. And at that point, he was, an elderly retired gentleman. But the point is that if you wanted to take a historical, actual presidential figure and spin a conspiracy yarn, how about one that makes sense? I know people on the left, and a lot of the entertainment industry is on the left, didn't like the second President Bush. A lot of people didn't like him. There's a lot of things about him that I didn't like, and I'm not politically to the left either. I consider myself, center/libertarian. But here's the thing. Does that have a place in an X-Files show? Couldn't you show some generic government official, not an actual person that people are going to have polarizing opinions of? Couldn't you show if you want to show there's some government shenanigans going on, show something that's not going to alienate half your audience? Again, less is more. They failed to learn the lessons of the original series. Less is more when it comes to suspense. Less is more when it comes to mystery. Less is more when it comes to the wonders of the universe. Less is more when it comes to not over-politicizing your TV show. They failed to learn the lessons of the show. And where they should have had more was the script writing, the storytelling, the original ideas. Most of these episodes just rehashed old ideas and did it worse than it was done originally. Worse, a lot of them broke continuity. Then, of course, you had the characters and how they were written and how they were acted. And it was abominable. The Mulder and Scully were like cardboard cutouts of themselves. You could have just literally used like a cardboard a cardboard sign of Mulder and Scully taken from like leftovers at a Comic-Con and saved on paying the actor and actress, because as much as I loved the performance of Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny in the original X-Files series, I don't know what they were doing on this. And then just the way it was written and they were acting to each other, the spark was gone, the magic was gone. They were like a bitchy old couple that was complaining about all the hard choices they had to make back when they were younger, and everything actually mattered. It was like a lame-ass reunion tour, excuse my French. And, they didn't add anything of substance to it. They took away from it by producing lame, unsuspenseful, laughably poorly written episodes that broke continuity. The characters didn't seem like themselves, and everything was just off. And, one has to ask, if you're going to try and revive a TV series or a franchise, the only reason to do that, beyond, of course, making money, which obviously people want to do, and I get that, but the only real reason to revive it is if you really, really think you can add to its legacy, not detract from it. When you're done with the reboot or the sequel or the continuation or whatever it is you're doing, are people going to think more highly or less of this program and of these characters and of these stories and of you, the creator? And we know the answer. Most people were very disappointed with the new X-Files entries. A lot of diehard fans like myself were incredibly disappointed. And that's not because we don't get the X-Files or we don't really understand what they're trying to do. No. We get the X-Files. That's why we don't appreciate what you've done to it. To quote one of the characters of the Lone Gunman from the two-parter episode Dreamland, when they're talking to that Morris guy from Area 51, who was passing himself off as Mulder. Who are you, you punk ass, and what have you done with Mulder? And I gotta say to Chris Carter, who are you, you punk ass, and what have you done with Chris Carter? Because this is not the X-Files we all know and love. And I could say even more about the thing that came after 2016. Apparently there was a lot of even worse stuff that happened, but I never saw that, so it would be unfair to go on secondhand reports or thirdhand reports. But I will say that from what I've heard, if what I've heard is true, they've gone even more off the deep end. And it seems like the only reason they brought it back was to try and milk it for more money. And that's sad. I wish that the creators of the show, all due credit to them for creating something that was wonderful and that was entertaining and that brought us a lot of joy years ago and still does for those of us who can catch it on reruns or watch the DVDs. But I wish they had as much respect for their creation as the fans who appreciate it do. Because it is kind of funny. Yes, it's their creation and they can do what they want with it. But I don't know about you, as far as I'm concerned, continuity stopped at the end of season 9. Right? I don't know what this other stuff is, but it's not the X-Files. And like I said, there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is just, it's been so long, these ideas have permeated the culture. Even the original now seems derivative. But part of it is, in many ways, whether in terms of doling out suspense, writing the characters, the character interactions that worked, how the characters were characterized, less is more in terms of suspense or politics or whatever. They failed to learn the lessons of the original series. I got to ask myself, how much did these people, and it's ironic, a lot of the original people came back for this. How much did these people really understand what made their creation work? A person can create something, whether it's a story or whether it's a patent for a new mechanical device. A person can create something that's really popular and that everybody loves without understanding exactly what it is that people love about it. And when they try to duplicate that in the future, they can go horribly wrong because they get wrong what it is they're trying to duplicate. They duplicate the wrong thing. They think this is why people like the material. The reality is it may be something completely different. And I would have given, prior to the 2016 reboot, yes, the second movie was disappointing. People were out of character, yada, yada, it broke continuity. But it wasn't nearly as bad as 2016 and whatever came after it. And I would have given Chris Carter credit for just having one bad showing, in a property that's been in existence for 10 years. That has 10 years of episodes and a movie and all sorts of stuff, comic books, novelizations, etc. I would have said to myself, okay, so he had one bad production, the second movie. That's about par for the course. Maybe he had a bad week. But after 2016, I have to ask myself, does Chris Carter really understand his own creation? And all due respect to Chris Carter, and I'm very thankful for the cool stuff he brought to us over the years. But I'm looking at the new X-Files and I'm like, I want to believe that what I'm watching is the X-Files. But I can only suspend credulity so much. And at the end of the day, wanting to believe only gets you so far. You have to give me a reason to believe. And the new X-Files stuff hasn't given me a reason to believe that it's the X-Files. So as far as I'm concerned, continuity stopped at the end of season 9. And these guys, it's like they didn't learn the lesson of their own creation. And I think that's kind of sad. And we've seen this, to be fair, with other reboots. The reboot of Ghostbusters was incredibly unpopular, although some people liked it. The reboot, or I should say the continuation of the Star Wars saga, there were some very heavy criticisms to be found of, in particular, The Last Jedi and how some of the original characters were treated. I think part of this is disgruntled nostalgia. People don't like how the stuff they grew up with is being, as they perceive it, disrespected. But I think there also is a lack of disrespect on the part of many of these people when they try to bring back properties or extend franchises. I don't think they realize what it is that made them popular in the first place and why they have so many fans. And yet they're trying to exploit the fans, and they have an existing property, they want to drag people into theaters or to watch something on TV, and I get that. And they figure it's probably a safer bet than creating something new. But if you're not going to add to it, again, aside from just milking it for money, which is obviously a reason for people, but the only real reason, if you're serious about caring about your creation, to bring it back is if you're going to add to the legacy of those characters and those stories and yourself as a creator. After watching the new stuff, are people going to think more or less of it and you? And we know the answer with the X-Files, and we have kind of a hint with some of these other things that they've tried to reboot or rebrand. And with a lot of them, it's an open question of, is it doing more harm than good to the franchise? With the X-Files, there is no question. Very few people are happy who are really hardcore X-Files fans with what they've done to the X-Files. And I would have been, I was so excited and looking so forward to it. But the truth is, as an X-Files fan, I wish they had left it dead and buried. I wish they hadn't tried to bring it back. Because, I don't know what they brought back, some kind of zombie or whatever, but it wasn't the X-Files, right? Lone Rider out.